The Ukrainian army has entered a new phase in its fight against Russia's invasion attempt. The reports published today by the British intelligence revealed very important facts. Immediately after this report, there was another explosion in Russia. Today, as Anchor News, we have prepared the latest developments, reports and analyses on the war between Ukraine and Russia for you. Here are the latest developments. The Ukrainian army launched new operations after it managed to halt the Russian advance. The Ukrainian army first bombarded military bases in the regions occupied by Russia. During these operations, the Russian army suffered very serious losses. Russia was forced to withdraw from most of the occupied territories. The war has now spread to Russian territory. Intelligence reports prepared by the British Ministry of Defense contain striking information on this issue. According to the reports, Russia is making great efforts to increase its air defenses, but without success. The following statements were used in the report. Russia has long placed a very high priority on maintaining its advanced ground-based air defenses, but it is becoming increasingly clear that Russia is struggling to counter air threats from deep within. This threat has grown even more after the operation on the Engels airbase. The drone attack on the Engels airbase in Russia's Saratov region has completely changed the course of the war. Using drones, the Ukrainian army carried out a very important operation against Russia's most strategic airbase. As a result of this operation, many Russian aircraft were damaged. 3 Russian soldiers were also killed. After this incident, security measures were increased at all military bases in Russia. Airplanes belonging to the Russian army were towed to hangars. Russian soldiers experienced a great panic. The Ukrainian army continued its operations. Today, a new drone operation was carried out at the Engels base. Citizens living in the area say that a very strong explosion was heard. However, the outcome of the operation is not yet known. Russian authorities claim that the Ukrainian army drone was destroyed. However, the Ukrainian government's statements are not reliable because Russia claims that all Ukrainian attacks have failed. But the truth is emerging on the battlefield. No one trusts the Kremlin's statements. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry has not yet released any information about the operation. Everyone is eagerly waiting for a statement from Ukrainian authorities. It was very important that this operation was carried out immediately after the statement from the UK. It is thought that Ukraine will continue to carry out new operations against military bases in Russia. Ukrainians are quite brave in this regard. Today, news of another fire in Russia shook the country. A ship caught fire in St. Petersburg, one of the biggest cities of Russia. The oil tanker Arctica was ready to depart from the port of St. Petersburg. However, a huge fire broke out at this time. The oil-laden ship burst into flames in a short time. This fire caused a great panic in the port of St. Petersburg. Other ships in the harbor were immediately removed from the area. It is known that millions of dollars worth of oil were destroyed by the fire on this fuel tanker. However, the cause of the fire has not yet been revealed. The Russian press says that this fire may have been set by the Ukrainian military. Yesterday, a fire broke out on one of the biggest ships of the Russian Navy. The Russian aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov caught fire while being launched from the pools where it was taken for maintenance. Due to the fire on the ship, maintenance work has resumed. It turned out that the aircraft carrier will not be able to go to sea for another month. Russia has been trying to fight fires for a long time. Fires are breaking out one after another in the center of Moscow in large shopping malls and on strategic ships in Russian ports. The Russian fire brigade cannot catch up with any of these fires. Black smoke is constantly filling the sky in Russia due to the fires that last for hours. Because of these fires and explosions in Russia, there is a great chaos in the country. Russian President Vladimir Putin made very bold statements before this war started. Putin claimed that the war would be over in a few days and that no Russian soldier would be harmed. But as a result of the great success of the Ukrainian army, the damage to the Russian army has increased. Putin cannot even provide security in his country anymore. The successive explosions in Russia are also affecting the course of the war. There are two reasons for this. First of all, these explosions are scaring the Russian people. Russian citizens are tired of seeing black smoke and hearing news of fires. No Russian civilians have been harmed in any operation by the Ukrainian army so far. But the Russian people are still scared. There are constant calls for this war to end as soon as possible. This pressure from Russian citizens is also affecting the Kremlin administration. Many senior Kremlin officials think that Russia should withdraw from this war. The second reason is much more important for Putin. The explosions in Russia are doing a lot of damage to Putin's reputation. Putin is seen as a leader who has failed to ensure security in his country. This makes the Russian people very angry with Putin. Russian people do not trust Putin. Putin, who is losing his reputation day by day, is unable to prevent these explosions. NATO member states have sent the most advanced weapons to Ukraine against these weapons. The Russian army can do nothing. Putin is completely helpless, especially Bayraktar. Drones are completely changing the course of this war. These drones, which can fly at a very high altitude, cannot be stopped by Russia's air defense systems. By using these drones, the Ukrainian army can establish a huge superiority over the Russian army. Bayraktar drones produced in Turkey have become Putin's worst nightmare. The Ukrainian army used these drones to continuously track the Russian army. The plans and attacks of the Russian soldiers were exposed in advance. This directly affected the success of the Ukrainian army in the war. It is claimed that these drones were also used in the explosions in Russia. However, the claim that all the explosions were caused by drones is not true. There are also many claims about the outbreak of fires. However, there are so many fires in Russia that it is not possible to uncover the truth. The Russian government claims that all of these fires are accidental. The Russian press continuously investigate the facts. Intelligence units of other countries are also preparing reports to find out the method by which these fires are started. What do you think about these explosions in Russia? Do you think the explosions at Russian military bases will continue? Do you trust the information in the British intelligence reports? The war between Ukraine and Russia has led to a severe crisis in the world political arena, especially in recent days. Turkey, an ally of Ukraine and acting as a mediator in its efforts to discourage Russia from this war, also took its place in critical diplomacy traffic. Turkey has tried to stop Russia from the invasion of Ukraine with the negotiations it has held in succession in the past days. Russia, on the other hand, took a surprising step against Turkey's efforts to end the war. Since the beginning of the war, Turkey has been working hard to convince Russia to end the war and to return Crimea to Ukraine. As a result of the talks between Turkey and Russia this week, the Russian administration is responding to calls for negotiations by abandoning its long-standing harsh stance. While Vladimir Putin previously stated that the negotiations would not be held with the USA, Germany, and the UK, he is now taking a step back after meeting with Turkey. In addition, serious steps were taken on the grain agreement, prisoner exchange, and Black Sea security. These talks are very serious steps to keep Ukraine's current economy alive and to raise the morale of the whole of Ukraine. We will present you with all the details of Turkey's warnings to Russia and the final points reached as a result of the negotiations. After taking a look at the background of the sharp change in Russia's harsh attitude, we will examine the critical talks that took place between Turkey and Russia in the shadow of the chaos of the war. Turkey's move and Finland's recent accession to NATO reshaped Europe's security landscape, upsetting Putin's plans and changing Russian policies. This move doubled Russia's border with NATO. It marked a strategic and political setback for Putin, who had long complained about NATO's expansion towards Russia and used this as a justification for the invasion. Following Finland's accession to the International Military Alliance, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken acknowledged that Putin's aggression encouraged countries to take measures to protect their defenses and deter potential Russian aggression. But despite the rhetoric, Vladimir Putin is unlikely to reverse this setback with an aggressive stance, according to a prominent Helsinki-based analyst. But the Russian Ministry of Defense has threatened Finland with military countermeasures after the Scandinavian state joins NATO amid Putin's widely announced plan to move nuclear weapons to Belarus. But Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu described Finland's NATO membership as a dangerous and historic mistake. In fact, Moscow has consistently implemented these threat policies against the Baltic, Northern EU, and NATO countries ever since it illegally annexed Crimea from Ukraine. However, we must also bear in mind that the Kremlin has a long history of making nuclear threats and that this latest clamor is unlikely to have a significant impact on the region's strategic balance. So right now we can see that the weather in Finland remains calm, despite the belligerent threats from Putin's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov also criticized NATO's anti-Russia stance, but also downplayed the effect, citing no territorial disputes between Russia and Finland. At this point, Turkey, which has a mediator role, has taken critical steps to reduce this hidden tension in the international power diplomacy and to ensure that the war in Ukraine ends as soon as possible. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish presidential spokesperson Ibrahim Kalin had an important meeting recently. Important issues were discussed at the critical meeting of Putin and Kulin. As a result of this giant summit, it was announced that Putin was willing to start negotiations with NATO on Ukraine. Kremlin representative Dmitry Peskov announced during the meeting that Putin acknowledged that Russia does not want to avoid talking about Ukraine forever and is ready to enter negotiations to end the conflict that has killed thousands and displaced millions of people. The decision of Russian leader Vladimir Putin, who took a step back as a result of this striking move by Turkey, shocked the whole world. According to the reports in the Turkish press, Putin stated that he does not want war forever and that they will not flee from negotiations. After these critical statements, it was among the striking news that Putin's main demand was that the negotiations be conducted with Germany, in particular the USA and the West. After Putin got in touch with Ibrahim Kalin, diplomatic traffic continued rapidly. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov arrived in Ankara for a two-day visit to discuss Russia's war against Ukraine and Ankara's ties with Damascus and Yerevan. On the second day, Lavrov met with his Turkish counterpart, Mevlut Cavusoglu. Russia-Ukraine war dominated the agenda of the duo. Meanwhile, Lavrov stated that during their talks in Turkey that they wanted Ukrainian peace talks to focus on creating a new world order. In fact, Russia has been expressing that it's been fighting against the dominance of the USA on the international scene for a long time and argues that the Ukraine attack is part of this struggle. However, the attitudes of both Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov towards peace negotiations indicate that Russia's policies towards the Ukraine war have changed drastically. On the other hand, during this critical summit, Cavusoglu also expressed Turkey's sincere gratitude to Russia for its rapid relief efforts after the earthquakes that killed thousands of people on February 6 in southeast Turkey. Lavrov has become the highest-ranking Russian official to visit Turkey since the earthquakes. After the meeting between Cavusoglu and Lavrov, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan received Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who came to Turkey. The critical meeting between the two took place at the presidential complex. Again, the Ukraine war was on the agenda. Mutual demands were reconsidered, and the president of Turkey stated that they would like to see a new world in peace again. Considering all these gigantic negotiations 1 year behind the Russia-Ukraine war, Turkey has consolidated its position in the Middle Corridor. As a result of its geographical location and the right policies it has followed, NATO member Turkey has positioned itself as a mediator between Kiev and Moscow in this war that's been going on for more than a year and has also mediated with the UN. Thanks to its important diplomatic breakthroughs so far, a remarkable message came from the United States about the steps Turkey took to end this war. US Department of State spokesperson Ned Price emphasized that they appreciate the constructive role played by Turkey in ending the Russia-Ukraine war and stated that Turkey uses its relations with the two countries for the hope of peace. Price emphasized that Ankara has been a constructive player since the beginning of the war. In addition, the spokesperson of the U.S. State Department had a telephone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky regarding the ceasefire. He also drew attention to the role played by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in the Black Sea Grain Initiative hosted by the United Nations Security General Antonio Guterres. Additionally, Price was quite right about that because the role played by Turkey, this mechanism, the Grain Initiative, could not be renewed as a result. This mechanism is a system that supplies tons of grain to the world's most needy countries. In addition to using its position as a NATO member and good relations with the international community, Turkey also tried to raise hopes for peace by using its relations with Ukraine and Russia. In short, Turkey made a lot of effort to end this war. If you remember, President Erdogan was one of the leaders who met most frequently with the leaders of both countries. In all the talks, the main agenda was what steps could be taken for peace. In addition, since the beginning of the war, President Erdogan had frequent telephone conversations with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. In this process, when Western states confronted Russia, Turkey managed to become a NATO member that could hold talks with both Russia and Ukraine. This situation was criticized by many European countries, especially France. As a matter of fact, French President Emmanuel Macron made it clear that he did not want Turkey to be the only world power, the only NATO member that continues to negotiate with Russia. However, it is a fact that a scenario in which Turkey cannot establish a dialogue with Russia means a much more problematic future for both Europe and the parties to the war. For this reason, the steps taken by Turkey are of vital importance for the course of the war in Ukraine. And even now, thanks to Turkey's communications with Lavrov and Putin, Russia seems this close to peace talks for the first time in a long time. There is a lot of news from the Obama direction after Ukrainians conducted a successful unblocking operation in the home of origin. Ukrainians once again started to actively use the home of a highway to deliver supplies directly to the city. Such developments put a spoke in the wheel of the Wagner Group as Ukrainian resistance increased. As you remember, the head of the Wagner Group, Prigozhin, announced that he would leave Bakhmut on the 10th of May. The Russian Ministry of Defense pretended to comply with Prigozhin's claims at first, but on the 9th of May, Prigozhin received a letter from the ministry saying that if he leaves Bakhmut, he would be immediately tried for treason. Prigozhin sees that the collapse of the flanks that he predicted is happening and understands that there is a huge risk of being taken into a pocket. His new plan therefore became taking Bakhmut within the coming days, no matter the losses, to declare that his detachment completed the job so he could formally transfer the responsibility for the region to the airborne forces and escape the cauldron. That is why, in the light of increased resistance due to increased supplies, the Wagner forces switched their focus to the outer edge of the city and devoted significant resources to making sure that the supplies are cut. The latest confirmed reports indicate that Russians managed to advance and are only one street away from the supply road, which means that it cannot be used anymore. When it comes to the citadel, the main Ukrainian positions are located in the last block of fortifications. Such developments were inevitable because the recent footage shows that Russians have absolutely demolished the main firing positions that had prevented Russians from entering the citadel for weeks. Several hours ago, Prigozhin reported that his forces will not be able to encircle any Ukrainians and will have to take the rest of Bakhmut through brutal fighting. He once again took a chance to pillory the chief of staff, Gerasimov, for the collapse of the flanks that ensured that there was no possibility of encirclement and no possibility of starving Ukrainians out. and today it was confirmed that Ukrainians collapsed the flanks by several more kilometers. After a short regrouping and consolidation of the newly gained tactical positions in the forest, Ukrainians launched multiple attacks in the direction of Kashyuka. A lot of combat footage was released by many assault detachments of the clearing and storming operations. The 3rd Assault Brigade showed how they used a tank to undermine Russian defense in a tree line and ended up blowing up the enemy ammo depot. Another video shows how an assault unit was getting ready to storm the approximate Russian positions in a tree line when the commander suspected that the Russians unveiled their positions as the first shell seemed to be too accurate. The immediate reactions of the whole unit as the next shell blew up the empty shelter. A fighter from the 24th Assault Brigade reported that their advances were so successful that they started to have a new problem because they penetrated Russian positions so deeply. Some Russian forces started shooting at them from the back. He said that they still decided not to retreat, requested support from the Presidential Brigade that operated in the vicinity and continued to move forward. Seeing the relentless movement of the Ukrainians, many Russian troops tried to abandon their positions and retreat along the tree line. Ironically, according to the soldiers on the ground, this actually increased their losses because almost all of them died from artillery fire and they had better chances of survival by surrendering and becoming prisoners of war. However, as reported by a fighter from the Adar battalion during this storming operation, Russians lost more than 80 troops. Given the current setting, the next logical step is attacking Ishyivka, and many Ukrainian soldiers already reported about the preparation for this storming operation. The biggest obstacle on the way is an extensive trench network on the hill north of the settlement. But once it is taken, Russians will have to retreat not only from the village in the lowlands, but also from the fields back to Opi.